In the ruins of Pompeii, experts are restoring a once grand mansion. Its extravagant frescoes and lavish decor are eerily frozen in time. But it's not just the ancient architecture that's impressive. As the property is slowly uncovered, we learn more about the men who once called it home, and it's certainly an impressive story. Experts uncover a lavish Pompeii estate owned by two former slaves who became staggeringly wealthy. At one time, the future owners of the House of the Vedii were mere slaves, destined to live in the shadow of their wealthy master. But thanks to a twist of fate, they rose to become members of Pompeii's elite. Now wielding their own power and influence, they designed a home so ostentatious that nobody would question their new position. Years later, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius destroyed the House of the Vedii along with all of Pompeii. And for almost 2 millennia, it lay buried under layers of ash and debris. Now, though, it is open to the public after a lengthy restoration, a testament to its owner's unlikely shifting fortunes. Although it's most famous for the devastating eruption that took place in 79 AD, the city of Pompeii actually has a long history stretching back to the 8th century BC. First established by the Aussi people of central Italy, it grew under the influence of the Greeks and Phoenicians, who established a port in the region. Later, the Etruscans arrived, establishing a strategic outpost in Pompeii. And for a short period of time, the city passed back into Greek control before being conquered by the Samnites in the 5th century BC. Eventually, though, it became impossible to escape the ever-expanding influence of the Roman Empire. At first, the people of Pompeii found themselves at odds with the empire, fighting on the opposite side of the Samnite Wars. But over time, they grew loyal to Rome, although they retained a certain degree of autonomy. And as a reward, much was invested in the development of the city. As part of the Roman Empire, Pompeii grew to include many grand public buildings, such as temples, baths, and even a theater. And by the 1st century BC, the city had become a bustling port, as well as a popular vacation spot for citizens wishing to escape the heat of Rome. But then, something unexpected happened. 17 years before the volcanic eruption that would destroy the city, a devastating earthquake struck Pompeii and the neighboring town of Herculaneum. Although the death toll is unknown, records tell us that the resulting damage was severe, and it took the citizens many years to rebuild. But this was just a taste of the disaster that was to come. In the aftermath of the earthquake, reports claim, many of Pompeii's wealthier citizens decided to move away, settling in different parts of the empire. And in their absence, a power vacuum was created. As the families who had formed the city's elite for generations fled, a new upper class rose to take their place. This time round, though, the upper echelons of Pompeii society were occupied by the nouveau riche. Those whose wealth had only recently been acquired. And they embraced their new role with aplomb. All across the city, families seeking to cement their elevated status in the community began constructing grand and elaborate buildings. Among those to rise from the rubble of Pompeii were two men, known as Aulus Vettius Restitus and Aulus Vettius Conviva. According to some, the pair were brothers, sold into slavery, only to be released and earn their fortune as free men. Others, though, claim that the pair were never related by blood. If they were from the same family, the first two names would have been different, and they would have the same surname. Pompeii Archaeological Parks Gabriel Zuchtragel told British newspaper The Guardian in January 2023. It was uncommon to have biological siblings who were slaves and then set free because family ties were cut with slavery, so it's very unlikely they were brothers. It's more likely that they were buddies during their time as slaves and then set free, Zuchtragel continued. But whatever the relationship between Conviva and Restitus, whose name means given back, it's clear that these two former slaves experienced a dramatic shift in fortunes at some stage in their lives. In fact, by the time that Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the former slaves had acquired a sprawling property in one of the richest parts of Pompeii. And they had spared absolutely no expense decorating it with elaborate frescoes and an expansive garden. But how exactly did they acquire their freedom and go on to amass great riches? At the time, slaves were ubiquitous across the Roman Empire and could be found in almost every household. But they didn't just serve as laborers and domestic staff. According to scholars, many were well-educated and skilled, with some even managing their own businesses on behalf of their masters. Despite its reliance on slaves, though, Roman society allowed for a degree of social mobility. And for people such as Conviva and Aristides, who wished to secure their freedom, there were two possible routes to pursue. They could, according to scholars, buy their way out or be granted emancipation by their master. If successful, the former slaves would become part of the class known as freedmen or libertini. And although they were barred from certain occupations, such as politician, senator, or priest, they were free to seek their fortune in any other way they saw fit. In some cases, they proved to be such good businessmen that they became just as wealthy as their one-time masters. No matter how much wealth the freedmen accumulated, though, they would never be seen as the true elite. And some would spend the rest of their lives attempting to overcome this stigma. In homes and tombs across Pompeii, former slaves installed lavish decor in an attempt to prove that they were just as worthy as their peers born into privilege. And Conviva and Aristides, it seems, were no different. According to reports, the former slaves embarked on a career as wine merchants after becoming freedmen. Speaking to the Associated Press news agency in January 2023, Zuchtragel described the pair's success, explaining that they had reached the highest ranks of local society, at least economically. Having finally joined the elite of Pompeii, Conviva and Aristides, like many freedmen before them, sought to show off their newfound status. And so they acquired a grand property, known today as the House of the Vedii, and set about decorating it in a lavish fashion. Soon, it would become one of the finest buildings in the city. Located close to the city's Vesuvian Gate, the House of the Vedii is one of the biggest private residences in all of Pompeii. Arranged across a series of atriums and porches, the property is set around a large central garden and boasts a formal dining room, servants' quarters, and a taberna, or shop. Clearly, then, Conviva and Aristides were going up in the world, and they wanted everyone to know about it. But less than 2 decades after the house was completed, their new lives as part of Pompeii's elite were cut tragically short. In October 79, Mount Vesuvius erupted, raining destruction down on the city and burying the House of the Vedii for almost 2,000 years. Up until that point, the citizens of Pompeii hadn't viewed Mount Vesuvius as much of a threat, even though it was located just 12 miles north of the city. After all, it hadn't erupted in hundreds of years. But in the early hours of the afternoon, the long-dormant volcano would prove exactly what it was capable of. As Mount Vesuvius erupted, it sent a plume of ash and molten volcanic rock high into the air. And for almost 24 hours, this deadly debris rained down on the citizens of Pompeii. In the chaos, the majority of residents fled the city, although thousands of people stubbornly stayed behind. Unfortunately, worse was to come. Several hours after the initial eruption, the city was hit by a series of pyroclastic flows, destructive streams of gas and rock that rapidly engulf everything in their path. And within as little as 15 minutes, everyone who had decided to remain in Pompeii was dead. By the time that the flows subsided, Pompeii had been buried beneath a thick layer of debris, its victims frozen in a macabre snapshot of the disaster. Were Conviva and Aristides among them? Or had they already fled the city before it was wiped out? Although they may have escaped unscathed, the same could not be said for their elaborate home. Like the rest of the city, the House of the Vedii remained buried as the centuries ticked past. And apart from the odd looter, nobody disturbed the ruins of Pompeii for more than 1,600 years. Then, in the early 18th century, the neighboring town of Herculaneum was rediscovered, prompting a search for similar architectural treasures nearby. In 1748, archaeologists began excavating the site in earnest, a painstaking job that continues to this day. And over time, they began to uncover the streets and buildings of Pompeii. But it would be another 150 years before they would discover the House of the Vedii and learn more about the former slaves who once lived there. Beginning in 1894, archaeologists started to uncover what would soon become known as one of the grandest houses in Pompeii. And it wasn't just its size that made the House of the Vedii so impressive. Throughout the property, a number of elaborate frescoes testified to the owner's wealth, each remarkably preserved despite their great age. Among the artistic treasures found at the House of the Vedii were a series of 12 panels, each depicting a different scene from Greek mythology. In one, the infant Hercules can be seen battling two snakes sent by the goddess Hera to destroy him. And elsewhere the gods Pan and Eros are shown preparing for a wrestling match. In another fresco, the Greek hero Achilles is depicted in exile on Skyros, while other paintings show mythological figures such as Ariadne, Dionysus, and Hero and Leander. And in one room, a detailed frieze features Cupids carrying out various everyday activities including, in a nod to Conviva and Aristides, bartering wine. One particularly notable feature is a fresco that sits at the entrance to the house of the Vedii, featuring Priapus, the Greek god of fertility. Alongside him sits a large bag of money, thought to represent the wealth amassed by the two former slaves. Meanwhile, an erotic theme runs through a small adjoining room, leading experts to theorize that it may once have served as a brothel. We're seeing here the last phase of the Pompeian wall painting with incredible details, so you can stand before these images for hours and still discover new details, Zuchtragel told the Associated Press. Clearly, the House of the Vedii is fascinating on artistic merit alone, but it's the story of Conviva and Aristides that has really captured imaginations. According to reports, archaeologists used a combination of engraved seals, documents, and graffiti to identify the one-time owners of the mansion. But why exactly did these former slaves choose to decorate their home in such an elaborate fashion? Well, experts believe that it was all about asserting their position as Pompeii's new upper class. They evidently tried to show their new status also through culture and through Greek mythological paintings, and it's all about saying, "We've made it, and so we are part of this elite," Zuchtragel continued. With their fantastical frescoes and friezes, then, might Conviva and Aristides have hoped to be accepted at last? The House of the Vedii is like the history of Pompeii and actually of Roman society within one house, Zuchtragel added. So, you have this mixture. Nature, architecture, art. But it is also a story about the social life of the Pompeian society and actually the Roman world in this phase of history. In the years since the initial excavation, reports claim, restorers have attempted to preserve the fragile paintings by coating them in paraffin. But specialist Stefania Judas explained that this hasn't always had the desired effect. Speaking to the Associated Press, she said, the process resulted in them becoming very blurred over time because very thick and opaque layers formed, making it difficult to read the fresco. For the past 2 decades, though, experts have been hard at work restoring the House of the Vedii to its former glory. And in January 2023 it reopened to the public, boasting frescoes as vibrant as the day they had been made. According to Judas, the revived paintings reflect the dreams and imagination and anxieties of the owners because they live between these images. Meanwhile, excavations continue at Pompeii, although their focus has shifted over the years. In the past, you see, much emphasis has been placed on the grand temples and palaces that lay buried within the lost city. The relics of long-forgotten nobles and priests. But recently, archaeologists have broadened their scope to study the lives of everyday citizens as well. For example, in 2021 it was announced that a small room once used as slave quarters had been discovered in Pompeii. And the following year, archaeologists excavated a home once belonging to a middle-class family who, like Conviva and Aristides, had decorated their property to reflect their lofty social goals. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.